Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. Journey through 4 more true and bewildering accounts of time-slip phenomena where the past intrudes upon the present. From a medieval Polish village appearing out of thin air to a Connecticut man's walk through a 19th century version of his town, a young woman who vanishes in front of her friends only to appear among a Victorian crowd of onlookers, and a family's chilling radio encounter with the 1960s. Such experiences remind us to be humble and to challenge our certainties about the nature of time and reality. Medieval misstep. 17-year-old Sophia, 16-year-old Alicia, and 18-year-old Isabella grew up together in the small rural village of Dorsze, located deep in the forests of southeastern Poland's Lublin voivodeship. It was late 1967 and the 3 friends were finishing their last year of schooling at the village's one-room schoolhouse. In early October, after spending the day browsing shops and cafes in the nearby town of Krasnik, the 3 girls decided to take a shortcut home through the forest. As the sun began to set, they entered the tree line on the northeast side of the forest, laughing and chatting as they walked. After roughly an hour, the dense forest opened up into a small circular clearing. Stepping into the open space, the girls were astonished to see a medieval village spread out before them. Conical thatch roof cottages surrounded a central square where villagers, dressed in simple tunics and headscarves, went about various tasks. Some sat sewing and weaving, others tended gardens and livestock. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer rang out from a workshop on the far side. Sophia, Alicia and Isabella froze in disbelief. Their first thought was that maybe they had stumbled upon a community dedicated to the preservation of medieval society by reliving the customs, dress and lifestyle of medieval times. Unsure what to make of the scene, the 3 friends cautiously moved through the village square. The villagers took no notice of them, continuing on with their work. The friends marvelled at the authenticity of it all, the crude timber and daub houses, the smell of wood smoke and baked bread. It was like walking into a living medieval museum. Sophia spotted a well in the centre of the square and eagerly pumped the handle to draw up a bucket of water. As the light faded, the 3 friends quickened their pace, eager to get home and tell their parents what they had discovered. Entering the forest on the far side of the village, they turned back to look at the amazing sight one last time. But to their astonishment, the medieval village was gone. No sign remained of the clearing or buildings, only the dark, silent forest. Stunned, the girls made their way home in the deepening gloom. News of the girls' bizarre experience spread quickly through their small village, eliciting everything from awed intrigue to accusations of lies and mischief. But Sophia, Alicia and Isabella stuck firmly to their story. The village they stumbled upon felt more real than a dream or fantasy, they insisted. Many in the village came to accept that the girls had indeed witnessed something unexplainable in those woods, and the story still stands as a local legend in the area. Rockville Rewind. Malcolm Blair lived in the small town of Rockville, Connecticut. Nestled along the banks of the Hockanum River, Rockville's roots stretched back to before the Civil War. Malcolm walked down the same road to work each day, passing colonial-era buildings that had stood for centuries. But one morning in 2005, Malcolm's routine walk to work took an unexpected turn. According to Malcolm, he had only made it halfway down the paved street when his surroundings were suddenly and abruptly transformed. The paved road, busy with modern cars, was replaced by a barren dirt road with scattered cobblestones. The road no longer stretched for miles, only the sharply turning leftward segment of the road toward the river remained, which now led to a small wooden bridge. The modern steel bridge Malcolm knew was gone. Malcolm looked around in disbelief at the changed landscape. The white column building on his right still stood, but now beyond it lay a wheat field instead of the shops and homes Malcolm was familiar with. Working in the field was a man with a scythe who eyed Malcolm suspiciously. Malcolm waved hesitantly, and the man responded with his own tentative wave. Moments later, the distinct clop of horse hooves approached from behind. Malcolm turned to see a horse-drawn carriage barrelling towards him. Then in a flash, everything was back to normal. The paved road, the cars, the familiar buildings. Malcolm shook his head and continued on to work, attempting to brush off the strange experience as a vivid daydream, but the encounter continued to weigh heavily on his mind. 2 years later, in 2007, Malcolm had a chillingly similar experience in Middletown, Connecticut, where he now lived. He was walking to work down Main Street when the town's backdrop of familiar sounds suddenly plunged into silence. A man sat motionless on a dead horse in the middle of the intersection at Main and Washington Streets. The buildings around Malcolm were again replaced by structures from around the late 19th century. Although Malcolm recognised that he was without doubt still in the same place, everything was completely transformed. He turned and saw that his apartment building was now an old warehouse. Malcolm, already late for work, continued his commute, dodging horse droppings lining the dirt road. However, his attention was caught as he noticed a horse-drawn flatbed carriage stop next to the dead horse, presumably to dispose of it. Halfway up Washington Street, Middletown returned to normal. Malcolm buried these inexplicable experiences deep in his memory until he uncovered corroborating evidence while researching Middletown's history. Online, he found photos depicting the very scenes he witnessed over a century ago. The wheat field in Rockville, the buildings along Main Street, and finally, the warehouse where his apartment building now stood, which had apparently burnt down in the 1960s. In fact, parts of the old brickwork and foundation still remained as part of the modern apartment structure, even after the fire. Although unfortunately he was unable to find any images to verify the small wooden bridge which used to stand where the modern steel bridge now stood. Though Malcolm still cannot explain what happened to him on those 2 puzzling mornings, those vivid scenes continue to leave him in awe. Into the past at Goodale Park. Samantha has experienced several bizarre time slips over the years, beginning at a young age, which left her terrified. But eventually she became accustomed to these strange occurrences and took in all that she saw during them. Her most recent time slip happened in 2019, while she was sitting on a railing at the gazebo in Goodale Park in Columbus, Ohio. Dressed in short shorts and a spaghetti-strap top, she was transported back to the late 18 or early 1900s. Suddenly, the 3 grassy blocks of the park were replaced by a historic neighbourhood with no sight of the freeway. Instead, horse-drawn carriages clip-clopped down brick roads. Corset dresses and breeches were plentiful as onlookers gawked at her modern attire. One man even tried to take a photo of her with his box camera. Understandably, her presence seemed to cause quite a stir. She even witnessed one well-dressed woman faint, presumably at the sight of Samantha's bare legs and midriff. Samantha imagined she would have reacted the same way if someone from the future appeared before her eyes. Those around her looked utterly bewildered by her presence. Meanwhile, in 2019, Samantha's friends who were with her in the park watched in disbelief as she vanished before their eyes. After some time, she reappeared in the same spot, back in the present moment. Samantha still keeps in touch with those who witnessed her disappearance that day. Radio TIMESLIP. In 2009, the Doyle family, parents Tom and Miranda, along with their 3 teenage children, were navigating the serpentine roads through the mountains of West Virginia along US Route 33. They were journeying back to North Carolina after touring colleges in Pittsburgh. As often happens in the mountains, their car radio began experiencing intermittent reception issues, with all stations seeming to cut out. As Tom fiddled with the dial, attempting to find a station clear of static, they stumbled upon an AM news broadcast. The voice, growing clearer amidst the white noise, spoke of President Nixon's decision to send additional troops into Vietnam. The broadcast continued, shifting to celebrate the release of a new Beatles album storming the charts. Amid the static, the unmistakable opening of Get Back began to play, a song Tom recognised despite the poor reception. Later, research by one of the sons seemed to corroborate the matching time frame of these events, both occurring in 1969. Within minutes, a sudden icy chill seemed to envelop the car, prompting the family to hastily turn on the car's heater. The station continued its programming of 1960s pop tunes and commercials, including a radio jingle for Budweiser as the King of Beers. As the Doyle family continued their drive, they speculated about the strange radio broadcast. Could it have been a nostalgia station replaying old hits, news and commercials, or perhaps part of a documentary or educational segment? Why weren't they receiving any other stations though? The weirdness of the situation intensified as they realised there were no other cars on the road. Then, after approximately 20 minutes, the broadcast abruptly turned to static and normal local stations returned. They shared nervous glances, half joking about having driven through the twilight zone. Had the Doyle family encountered a time slip or simply a rebroadcast of old content? Why had all the other stations cut out? Perhaps it was a local hobbyist station. But then why was its signal so abruptly lost, just as the regular reception returned? There is also the sudden drop in temperature and absence of other cars which seemed to accompany the strange broadcast. Was this simply a coincidence, or had the Doyle family briefly slipped backward in time to 1969?